Good evening, everybody. I'm Kevin Brown, and I want to welcome you here tonight. Thank you. We're hosting this event, and we're very glad to see you. I'm one of the owners of Berkeley LLC, and we own the Cumberland Technology Park, and so I'm here in that capacity. Just a couple basic things. Out the back door, in the hallway is the restrooms if anybody needs any. Also, we are videotaping this presentation tonight to put on a website that we'll launch in a few days called villageofgoodhope.com. There's a conflict tonight for a lot of people who can't be here, and it's kind of hard to get the date right for everybody. So they'll be able to see on the website what you're seeing tonight, and but I want you to be aware that we're videotaping as well. With me is a team. We have Dover Cole & Associates with us, Victor Dover and Josh Frank. Traffic Planning Design is with us, Jared Neal, and our counsel from Wixwanger Widener, Dave Getz, is with us tonight. So that's our team for the presentation, so that you're aware of that. Tonight, we're hoping for some feedback and input from you as the community. We have an idea, and we are wanting to shape it to make it as good as it possibly can be. And so that's really the gist of tonight's meeting. It's very open and transparent, and when we get to the end of the presentation, we do have a microphone over here that you can come to and make comments or ask questions of us, and we'll respond as best we can. The right arrow?
The keyboard right arrow.
Keyboard right arrow. I want to introduce you to the project area. This is part of the Cumberland Technology Park. It's a 115-acre tract, contiguous tract. Technology Parkway on the north, we'll say, Good Hope Road on the west. We border the township's facilities on the east and Creekview Park on the south. Our work at Cumberland Technology Park began in 1996. And so in 1996, we did a lot of work to build infrastructure, on-off ramps. Wirtsville Road was redone, signalized. We built the Technology Parkway. We enhanced the sewer facility and some pump stations. Subsequent years, Good Hope Road intersection was signalized. These were all things to help underwrite the growth that would happen in Cumberland Technology Park. Now, at the start of our work there, this project area was zoned RT, residential zone. And we requested and were granted rezoning to Office Park. And so it's been Office Park for quite a number of years. The first people we were able to attract to the park were Patriot News in 1998, and then what was then Pinnacle Health. It was to do a outpatient operation there, but it's now UPMC and a full-blown hospital. The tract that we're talking about, this 115 acres, has been farmed for 3 generations by the same family. 2 decades ago, the second generation of the family chose to sell the farm. And so we bought part of the farm, and an investor bought the rest of the farm. Since that time, we bought that investor's piece from them. So we have the property. Fortunately for us, the 3rd generation was willing to continue to farm it on our behalf, so that we could care for the farm until at such time it would be developed. So that's sort of the context of the history of our park. Now, we searched a long way. We really wanted a unique concept, a unique vision, a unique way of thinking about this 115-acre tract. And so our search led us to Dover Cole and Partners, and they have a way that they approach land use that is even new to us, who we've spent our lifetime developing real estate. And I want to just turn it over quickly to Victor Dover and let him talk about Dover Coal.
Thank you, Kevin. Well, I want to say thank you all for giving up time this evening and coming into the room with us to have a conversation about how this land can evolve. My name is Victor Dover. I'm a town planner and a neighborhood designer. I honestly, Kevin, I will tell you now, I'll confess now that you've already paid our invoices for a while, I have the best job in the whole world. Because what we get to do is travel all over the country and help communities decide what they want to be when they grow up. You know, what should stay the same, what should change, and how to address changing times. And that work means that we focus on making places where people want to be. And helping real estate developers, when we get to work for them, realize their business goals, but in a way that's respectful of the environment and the land and the community that they sit in. So our job, in a way, is unusual because a lot of the time we're working for local neighborhood groups or for the folks in historic districts who are working to revitalize them. We've learned a lot about livable, enduring communities from that, and working for local governments. And every once in a while, we will agree to take a private investors or private developers so-called greenfield development assignment. But I will tell you what we told Kevin and his partners when we first met, and that was that if they let us bring our pencils out and draw lines on the map on their precious property and your precious community, that we would be giving them the same recommendations, the same advice, the same answers that we would give if the neighborhood had hired us to, on your behalf, to tell the developer what could or would be good on their site. And so that journey has let us have the chance to work in 24 states and occasionally overseas. We've been able to help people find the right balance between meeting the needs of the business people and meeting the needs of those who are going to live with the results and those who are going to 100 years or longer from now be living with the results of drawing those lines on the map. So that work is different every time. So when you look at examples from our portfolio, you might have already Googled us. It's dovercoal.com. You can take pictures. What you'll see is that the projects don't all look alike, and they're different because we're trying to listen to the land and listen to the community and listen to the regional traditions and neighborhood design and architecture. And that gets reflected in the work. That example that's on the screen there is in South Carolina, for example. You could take the blindfold off in that place and look around and you would say, I must be in Charleston. And that's an attitude we try to bring to each project. So that is what we've done here. And what we want to do is go through a little bit of the history and explain what is already on this property in the township's official zoning maps. And then what we thought we could do if we're allowed to do better. Kevin?
Just for context, because of the topography of this site, a lot of you can't really necessarily see it. So just a few aerial photographs that we have, drone shots, if you will. So this shot is one technology park, I'll say looking south across the farm. So it was a lot of the old farm buildings that were once there and part of the tract. This is a shot sort of just turning towards the intersection of Good Hope Road and Technology Parkway. So you can see our neighbors across the street there. Again, just for context, where we're at. This turns 180 and looks back down Technology Parkway towards the township facility, and just gives you a perspective of that direction of the site. And then this is sort of up at the church, looking down across the tract, I'd say, pretty much towards the east. You can see there's some pretty serious grade changes, and areas where water runs and that kind of thing. So that's that's what exists out there today. These pictures are taken a few months ago, I think. What this slide is intended to do is just that pink area shows you where we are in context of all of Hampden Township. Just, again, to orient you specifically about where we're at. The next one does a similar thing, but it's with the zoning. So that blue inside our tract is the office park zone, and the lighter blue is residential zoning on either side. So just again, to give you context of what exists, what the current status of the tract is. In this office park zone, we basically have the right to build offices. And the offices we most likely would build here would be driven by the demand of medical offices. This has become sort of a medical corridor with Penn State going across the interchange and UPMC advancing its operations here. And so that's really sort of the demand for office that exists. In this specific project area, we think we could build at least a minimum of 1,250,000 square feet of offices. We can go, I believe, as high as 100 feet in this zone. And when we do that, using that number, 1,250,000, we would add about 27,000 additional trips every weekday out of the park, 2,500 at the AM and PM peak. And all that traffic would go up to Technology Parkway, and then it would have to disperse either to Good Hope Road intersection or the Wurtsville Road intersection. So that's what our current situation is. We wanted to try and, this slide, I guess, it's important because if you're going to build 1,250,000 square feet of office, you're going to have over 6,000 parking spaces. So there's a big amount of parking needed to support that kind of office level. So what we did is we took a picture, and that's what's encircled here in red, of an office already built in this park. We called it the IBM building. IBM's no longer a resident there, but it was built in this park across from the hospital and behind Patriot News. And it gives you a sense of the kind of offices that get built in this area, at least a live example in our own neighborhood. And then we just took that and said, okay, let's overlay that on this tract just to get some context of this 1,250,000 square feet of office. And so we would do about 7.5 of those kinds of projects on a tract of ground like this, 115 acres, if we maintain our current course. And so that site has not been touched. And so we just paused, pushed pause, and really just asked ourselves a simple question, and that was, can we do better? Can we do better than this? And very, very honestly,
The answer is yes.
the answer is yes, but we had to get some support and help for that vision. And so I'll turn it back over to Victor.
Well, the answer is yes. And we did walk all over the site and drive all around the site and its surroundings and fly the drone over and looked at it in summer and in autumn and in midwinter and in spring because we wanted to really understand it the way you do when you live with it, even though we don't live here ourselves. So we've been living with the land in that way. And then we took the map. And I guess I'm just, and I'm sort of going to report to you on what our process was like to derive an alternative plan. And, first you start with a sheet of paper that has the dimensions and the boundary and the known constraints. And we took note of what was next to it, where Creekview Park is located, where the surrounding streets are, what had been previously developed along Technology Parkway. But when you just look at a piece of land like this, no offense, Jared, but you're looking at it like an engineer does. But when you're on the ground and you're looking at it with your eyes, you don't see it like engineering, you see it like a place. So the next step, applying one of the big principles, which is that we wanted to see how green this could be, is we started removing from eligibility for development land that we thought, if we do this right, we could keep green. We start with the green parts and get them. We found obviously the sensitive areas, but then beyond that, the places where there were special vistas or linkages or flyways for birds and pollinators and that sort of thing, existing stands of trees, or existing long views across open space. And we said, start setting those aside. And that's what created a map we call the green network. You know, the perimeter in green, the green belt, like ribbons of green through the property, obviously preservation of sensitive ecological features like the existing streams, but also the neighborhood greens or village greens or plazas that would be inside. And then we hooked that to a starter network of green tree-lined streets. So what you're looking at in this map with just white and green is what we call the starting with the green parts map. And we said, okay, that leaves us with some places where development deliberately grouped together, so coming together in community in those places. If we're efficient with the development in those places, we could keep the rest of this in green. And many of those places that would remain green are the ones that, as residents of the surrounding area or visitors to Creekview Park, for example, you already appreciate because you get a chance to see them. Now, I want to point out one or two of those more closely. There's an area here, 12 acres in size, out of the 115 acres total, that we've recommended reserving for an expansion of Creekview Park. Essentially, what the developers are saying is, if the township sees the wisdom in allowing them to return to the residential use, it was once zoned for residential townhouses, and instead of the office use that it's been marked for on the maps more recently, that one of the things they could do in exchange is provide a big piece of land for the rational expansion of Creekview Park. And then we thought about where trails and greenways and boardwalk and so on should be networked as well, so they link to the park and to destinations within it. We identified a site for, we recommend for a dog park within that. Obviously, it will be the townships to decide how to use that land, but we thought that might be a good thing to do. So that was a beginning to elaborate the green parts a bit. I just want to pause for a second on that topic of trails and greenways. The National Association of Realtors and the National Association of Home Builders do regular surveys every couple of years. They do a national survey with a giant sample of respondents. And they seek to find out what it is from home seekers would make the most difference in their choice. And the number one amenity, as they call it, developer speak for good things you want in your neighborhood. The number one amenity sought by home seekers, you want to guess? It's trails. The number one feature that they like is a walkable community and places to walk to with sidewalks and trails that lead those between where you live and those destinations. Basically, if you can walk to a coffee shop, you're a happier neighborhood resident than if you can't walk to a coffee shop, as it turns out. And that's not just true in Pennsylvania, although it's very true here. It's a national sample. And so things like the green parts are actually where we have a chance, we do it right, to add a ton of value to the developed parts. Another of those big principles was that if you're making it possible for people to get out and come together in community and get fresh air and sunlight and burn some calories instead of just fossil fuels, they'll be healthier. And so the second of these big pillar principles was to make a healthy community. By the time we were finished with the map, before we drew buildings and parking and the like, we had taken the 115 acres and we had 60 acres set aside, more than 60 acres, set aside in open space. And we had drawn on this map 4.5 miles plus a little of new trail and ways that that trail system could connect to Creekview Park, essentially extending within the property new places to go for people who are visiting Creekview Park. They'd be welcome to take their run, for example, through the woodlands and so on. Now, that means that when we show you pictures from up above, like that drone shot of the developed parts, you're going to see buildings close together. Just get ready for that. But that's not a bad thing, because if you sell isolation to yourself and your heart or to your real estate customers, then every time something gets added, it seems to take away from what you're selling. But if what you're building is community, then when you add something more, you make it more complete. So we put the green and the buildings, and we imagined making a village in 3 parts. But one that would be made not out of a handful of really large buildings, like the office park would have been, but out of a big collection of small buildings. And they vary. Some are cottages and houses, detached houses. Some are row houses or townhouses, large and small. Some are live-work units. Some, a handful, a dozen, I think, apartments above storefronts. Some are in small apartment buildings, and some are in medium-sized apartment buildings. And I'm going to walk you through what that looks like. We thought, now you've got a place to go, or a way to get there, you need a place to go. So we set aside, color-coded in the brighter red corner here near Good Hope and Technology Parkway, a kind of neighborhood center where there's live-work units and a very small amount of neighborhood-serving storefront commercial could be included. And we thought that means that folks who want to go get that cup of coffee or visit the brewery, remember there's no place we can't add vitality to with enough craft beer and string lights, they'd be able to do that without taking their car out on the regional road system, right when you need that same lane or that same intersection. They'd be able to do that with a short trip inside the neighborhood, and possibly, for many months of the year, a short walking or biking trip. And you can kind of see from this orange and green map the idea of 3 separate quarters that come together around the central ribbons of green to make the village. Now, it's meant to be convenient in another key way, because this location, because of all that employment that's been grown up around it, thanks to the efforts of Kevin and his partners and others, those are employers that, or places of employment, would be very convenient for people who live here. So that's another whole group of folks who can make a short trip instead of a long one when they need to commute to work. And then the fourth and last of those big themes is the idea that it should be timeless. That we'll show you some more of the pictures that we've used for inspiration and the kind of architectural solutions that are being considered. But the idea is to use traditional architecture and scale, not those 100-foot tall buildings, but low rise, to use building types and architectural styles that are really drawing from all the beautiful local precedents here in the region. And then to mix them. So there won't be one vast area of just townhouses and another vast area of just apartments or what have you, but instead to blend them together. So the houses, the duplexes, the townhouses, and the apartments are distributed throughout the whole of the village. So just by way of summary, those 4 big themes were make it green, make it healthy, keep it convenient, and make it timeless. Now I'm going to ask Josh Frank, who's been one of the folks drawing late into the night for the last year on the details of the plan, to zoom in on the map I just showed and show you some more of the plan concepts. Josh. Excited so far?
All right. Thank you, Victor. So as was mentioned, I'm Josh Frank. I'm with Dover Cullen Partners. I'm going to zoom in and talk about some of the individual moments within each of the 3 areas that come together and make the village. So starting from the northern half at Technology Parkway heading south, there's a handful of really important spaces. And it's really important for us and for Kevin and his partners that this project, each neighborhood has access to both unique moments within it, but also the entirety as well. So it's really well connected. As was mentioned, there's a perimeter greenway that contributes to the 4.5 miles of trails that runs both on Tech Parkway and on Good Hope Road. We have, first coming in off Tech Parkway, you'll see there's the first block that's sort of square-shaped in the northwest corner. That's our sort of entry to the development. It has a few of those handful of ground floor retail spaces that could be coffee shops, could be a small gymnasium, small store, that sort of thing. Those lead to the Central Plaza, which would be a fantastic place for Christmas tree lighting or community events, not just for this development, but for the township entirely. And those are all connected, again, via a system of green trails that lead to a central green with a pond, perhaps a really beautiful bridge, we're hoping, and leading towards what we're calling the central boulevard of the project, which is a double alley of trees in the median, covering quite a bit of covered space. There is one area that is being set aside for the township to expand the facility. You'll see that in the red outline in this graphic and a few others. And then the last parts I wanted to mention was we do have a few stormwater ponds, but some of them have been shown more as recreation and are planned to be part of the community and not just another swale or pond. In the southern half of the site, as was mentioned, there's the Creekview Park expansion, which is about 12 plus acres. We think there's a really great potential for a dog park within that. And then, again, one of the things we wanted to make sure we preserve and treat as an asset that builds value is the existing stream and trail system. So there is very little, and I mean probably less than an acre, if not less than half of an acre, of any wetlands that are being impacted on this site. So we're preserving as much as we possibly can, and using them as part of this trail system to create a layer of boardwalks and native plantings and things of that nature to bring you towards Creekview Park. And if you're in Creekview Park, up towards the coffee shop, for example, after a soccer game or something like that. So it's interconnected just as much in that direction as well. So I get to do the fun part, which is zoom through some of the 3D models to give you an idea of exactly what it will feel like, hopefully, if we do this right. So this is looking from that square block that I mentioned earlier with the entry, the few corner stores, the coffee shops, that sort of thing. You'll see that just off the left side of the image. And as Victor mentioned, one of the really great design elements that we have as part of this project is the variety of housing types of architecture. It's not monolithic in any sense. It feels very much like a township or a hamlet. This is, again, sort of looking a little bit further in, but rotated as well. You can see sort of off in the very distance one of the lakes, the Grand Lakes that we're going to be creating, as well as the boulevard. You can see that LA of trees sort of marching along the boulevard. And I forgot to mention that we have the plaza as well with the Christmas tree in the center, if you can see that. This is the block facing the church property. So we've got a two-sided block, and so the units are facing both the boulevard and the park space, as well as towards the church, which will be a fantastic landscaped space as well. And then this is sort of into the center of the property, a little bit further removed from the perimeter. The larger apartment buildings are sharing a sort of garage space mid-block that is really very screened and not very visible from the site, as well as one of the other entry points to the development. And then I think I have two more. This is looking towards the east, and so you'll see just off in the right corner where it says draft, that's Creekview Park. The connection there is really important because that's where the scale of the development begins to become smaller. You'll see a lot of our homes and cottages located there instead of more towards the center of the development. So it's a greater transition towards the park and some of the neighboring communities. And then also this part of the neighborhood has its own sort of central green here in the middle with a fantastic building sort of terminating that vista. That's preserved as part of that as well. And that looks through almost all the way through the entire site. And then another shot, last but not least, of some of the smaller scale. So it's not just townhomes, not just apartments. We do have a great mix of smaller house and cottages that again are along some of the edges to soften that transition from maybe some higher density into the existing neighborhoods that are adjacent to it. And so I'm going to take a step back now and give it back to Victor as he goes over some of the precedent neighborhoods that you can expect to see some examples from.
Thanks, Josh. Learned a lot about this along the way, and it's made us think of examples that we know from other places or other experiences. I wanted to show you this one, but to highlight the importance of the green tree-lined streets that are imagined. The streets are drawn with, as you saw in Josh's images, short distances before they crank or they turn, and with narrow dimensions and continuous sidewalks and street trees. And the reason for that is because slow streets are safe streets, and they're more beautiful streets, and they're streets that will be welcoming to people of all ages and abilities. We did that in the St. Albans neighborhood in Davidson, North Carolina, which is where Davidson College is located. And I went there after it was implemented to take a photograph of it, and the lady you see in the green sweater was walking down this sidewalk. And so I spoke to her a little bit, and she said something interesting to me, not totally unprompted. She pointed to the line of trees, which you can see were pretty young when I made that picture. And she said those trees were like her lifeline, because she got out every day and walked around the block or around several blocks. And if they weren't there, she wouldn't do it. So it was interesting. Having the concrete for the sidewalk was not enough. It was the design of the street is what would determine whether she got her recommended exercise. The trails are similar. You know, the public health people tell us that if you live within half a mile of a Class 1 bikeway, you're 15% more likely to get your recommended daily exercise. Now, 15%, that, was it 9 out of 10 doctors recommend Trident for their patients who chew gum? 15% probably doesn't sound very big, but in public health, with epidemics of childhood obesity and early onset diabetes and hypertension and so on, for 15% more people to get their recommended daily exercise is worth billions in healthcare costs, public and private. So those are the things that we were thinking about. I thought you might want to think about too. We managed in that neighborhood, which has row houses similar in scale or the townhouses that are envisioned here, to get permission for safe streets that are slow by design. So you don't speed through this neighborhood because the dimensions are narrow. You slow down when a car is approaching you and you wave to your neighbor and so on, but you don't drive really fast there. Another one this reminded us about was Glenwood Park, which is a neighborhood we designed in Atlanta. And those images, the buildings that you see in the back of that image are the live work units, just a handful of them. They're basically townhouses that have provision for an expanded home-based business. The one on the end with the fancy roof garden is, you guessed it, a law office, Dave. That's the lawyer's office. He had an office space downtown in a glassy high-rise and said, why should I do that? I can work here. And he put his law office on the ground floor and his home above it. Just down the row, the third or fourth one down, much more modest and smaller, is the piano teacher's house. And so the kids in the neighborhood who go for piano lessons after school go to one of those live-work units. So those are forms of zero commute housing that don't add trips at the peak hour. Very powerful tool. And as it turns out in Atlanta, they were wildly popular. I mean, no one had built that in that area for a long time. So there was pent-up demand for it. And so we raised these examples and we've tried to incorporate possibilities like those as we've worked. The big headline here is that we're not just proposing to build a residential development. What we're proposing to build is a village that is complete. So it has a range of sizes, types, and prices to own or rent, including the cottages, which have master bedrooms downstairs and zero-step entries for seniors, including cottage courts or pocket neighborhoods where people have a shared garden. The one on the right might be interesting to you. Let me just zoom on that for just a second. That blue house. Did you know what I was going to say about it? It's 4 dwellings. That's 4 apartments in a mansion. The house looks like a big house on the neighborhood. It sits with the front porch facing the sidewalk, like the other grand houses nearby, but it actually has 4 smaller dwellings in it. So what that unlocks is the potential for, say, that young pharmacist who grew up here and then went off to State College or to Philadelphia or somewhere and came back. It allows them to live and they're starting their household in the same neighborhood where they grew up. Or allows for somebody whose kids grew up and left to downsize but stay in the same neighborhood with their congregation and their friends. So this is a very powerful tool, and it's not like what we think of when somebody says apartment building, right? But just moving along that range, let's go up a scale. I then have the houses that are attached to each other, not just the duplexes or mansion multifamily, but townhouses or row houses, including the LiveWorks, and small and medium apartment buildings, and again, a handful of buildings in mixed use. I want to show you a slide we just created this afternoon that represents what we're proposing to do here and what was illustrated on the maps Josh showed you, which is really to have a mix in which any one particular slice of the pie doesn't dominate the others. There will be, given that this was once upon a time zoned residential townhouse, and appropriately enough, because so many people need and want that type of household, we have a large number of townhouses, but then we have all those other types that I described, from the mansion multifamily, the apartments, the mixed use, the houses and cottages and duplexes. And we've received a lot of questions so far, but one of them we want to be sure to answer tonight is about the prices. The questions we've gotten so far, I think they come from a few different directions. Some people are excited about this and wanted to know how much it would cost to move in. Other folks were worried about this, thinking, well, wait, if we were selling isolation and you add something, are you reducing my property value or something? First, the target market for this development is young professionals and empty nesters. Certainly, we want a whole wide range of residents. But those two are important because they don't necessarily all go out onto the road network at the peak hour, for one thing, for traffic reasons, in the same way. And they don't overload schools. So that's an important reason that's a feature. The homes for sale, we think, will be within in a price range that goes from about $350,000 to about $575,000. So those are expensive. And done well and done right, there's every possibility that they will appreciate in value so quickly that those numbers will be even larger. Let's also remember, today there's very high construction costs, and the per unit land cost for a rare and special piece of land like this is also significant. And then when you get to rentals for apartments, there will be some that are 1 bedrooms and studios, some that are 2 bedrooms, some are 3 bedrooms. They are expected to range from about $1,500 to more than $2,000 a month. We have had projects in the past, just knowing, given that what I told you about our history, where we work sometimes for developers and sometimes for local governments and communities. But we've had projects in the past working for developers where folks from the adjacent neighborhoods were really worried. You're going to build something and it's going to have people close to other people. Is that going to somehow downgrade my prospects? Property value is not related to lot size. Okay, that's a myth. In fact, we have in this country a surplus of single-family detached houses on large lots. And as you know from Economics 101, surplus drives prices down, scarcity drives prices up. What we don't have enough of is lots that are right-sized for people who don't want to maintain a really large one. And we don't have enough for houses that are of the right size building for the many new households we're creating that aren't what they used to call in the old days Ozzie and Harriet households or Leave It to Beaver households. Many other kinds of households are being created, including a lot of singles living alone who need something that they have. Well, all of those unit types end up generating a higher value and price per square foot or per acre than the single-family detached houses. Just in one case where folks on the adjacent neighborhood were worried, they pointed to our plan and they said, well, your lots are smaller than ours. That was true. They were about 1/3 the size of the lots in the nearby cul-de-sac subdivision. But after it was built, and when people saw it and there were few nice articles in the Dwell magazines and so on. The lots in the new neighborhood were selling for twice the price of the ones in the older neighborhood. So it's 6 times the price per square foot and the compact option, but yet the accessible price to the person who was buying the home. So there was a win-win all around there, and no danger of decreasing your property values as a result of adding something new where the office park would have gone. Another question we get when people look at those images from above as they study our computer model is, where do you park? And we can go back to the images if you like, but if you look closely, in general, the parking is in the middle of the block. It's screened from view from the streets, or there's some on-street parking spaces to go with the parking areas that are in the middle of the block and courtyards. The yellow map here in the lower left-hand corner shows how that works. Basically put the buildings more toward the edges, put the parking more toward the middle, and then it doesn't look like a bunch of buildings poking out of parking lots. It looks like what it is, which is a neighborhood. There's plenty of buildings and plenty of parking. So while I'm on transportation, I just want to share with you a couple of working ideas we've reported to our developer clients, actually neighborhood founder clients. We should call you founders instead of developers. And one of those ideas is that the streets won't all be the same, that we've started to develop an atlas of different street types, from the boulevard, it's the wide, grand one that Josh mentioned, that's the red lines running from left to right across this map, to the skinniest, slowest streets. So that map of the different street types is a tool for us to communicate to the engineers what we have in mind about the way of making things connect and the way that traffic would move and so on. So, for example, the boulevard type is a really wide street. The typical neighborhood street is much narrower, but still tree-lined. And then we even have a 5-mile-an-hour street, what the Dutch call a Wonerf. You can Google that if you want to see how that works. But that's a shared space that operates at very, very slow speed. Now I'm going to ask Jared, our transportation planner and transportation engineer, to speak about the traffic, because I know the last of those 3 big questions we've gotten is always about traffic. But I'm going to steal your punchline, and you can show it again and say, as Kevin alluded in the beginning, the traffic impact of the existing by right zoning with no change, if they just go out and build for that, is gigantic compared to the potential traffic impact, even at peak hour, of the village that we've been describing. And he's going to explain to you why that's the case. Everybody in suburbia always wonders why. How come we get this much development? It seems like we get that much traffic congestion. And the answer is because they're not designing it the way we're designing this neighborhood. Jared?
Thank you. Jared Neal with Traffic Planning and Design, engineering firm in the local area here. I've been studying this corridor, really this area, for 10, 12 years now. So, but Victor is correct. The numbers that are in front of you here, before we get into them, just wanted to give a little bit of maybe a description as where they came from. These are projections, but it's based off a standard that we use in the engineering field. The Institute of Transportation Engineers puts out a publication that's collected from all over the area that they pull together, and they use that real live data to generate traffic for projects such as these before. So we know what needs to be done before this is implemented. So as Victor had indicated, this slide here shows that by right, so by right being the development that could go here without any type of change, you would see 27,831 trips. And honestly, this would be added right to Technology Parkway. And as you're all well aware, there's really 2 ways to get off of Technology Parkway, maybe a third, but the 2 main parts are up the Wartsville Road or down to Good Hope Road. During that, so if we look at that layout, what we do is there's all kinds of different hours throughout the day where traffic fluctuates. The AM peak hour and the PM peak hour are predominant time periods that we look at, really to understand what type of improvements need to be implemented to mitigate any type of impact. So what you're seeing here in the blue color, the light blue, is the the previous development or the by right development, 2,500 trips during that peak hour. In the PM peak hour, another 2,600 trips. What we're proposing is if you slide to the left of the screen there, over the 24-hour period, just under 6,000 trips. So massive reduction for the overall trip generation. In the AM peak hour, not 2,500, but 360. In the PM peak hour, not 2,700, but 450. And again, this is all pulled from data that was collected from other engineering firms. They submit to the Institute of Transportation Engineers, develop rates, and we use them to essentially project what's going to happen. Now, once we had this comparison, I asked Kevin, I said, I think it's probably important that we look at the real-life conditions of what's happening in this area. And I asked him, I said, how many intersections do you want me to study? How broad of a scope do you want? That's what he gave me. I said, wow. So this is 24 different intersections, which really is a comprehensive study. This is probably one of the largest ones that I've ever done in my career. And this looks not only at the intersections directly around the site, but this reaches as far to Wartsville Road where we hit the 81 ramps, and then as far south as where Creekview jumps on 581. So by having this amount of intersections in our analysis, we're able to understand where traffic is coming from, where it's going to, and really where the impact is going to be. So we use this information to get a sense of what type of improvements are going to be required. Because although this is a massive reduction over what is proposed by right, there's still a reduction in trips here, but there's still volume. Trips are a product of development. There's just going to be added traffic. So we wanted to make sure that we truly understood where those trips were going to go and what needed to be, how we were going to mitigate those. So as part of that traffic study that was performed, we were able to understand what type of turn lanes we needed, where they needed to go, but probably most important, how to control the traffic entering and exiting the site. The previous development, or the by right development, had all of the traffic exiting onto Technology Parkway, which I'd indicated before, 2 access points really to get out of there, Wartsville Road into Good Hope Road. We use that traffic study to really understand how can we lessen that impact. And although you can kind of see here, I have the 2 arrows going north and south. This is really what we said. Can we break that, and how can we add different access points into this development to really spread those trips over the area to allow people to come to and from 581, not necessarily all come from 81 onto Wartsville down to Technology Parkway. So by the layout that they had put together, that allowed me to use the information collected from our traffic counts and then distribute the trips which way that we saw that they were going. So that's kind of just a holistic view of the traffic study. As we go through the process, this will be submitted to the township for review. But ultimately, this is kind of like just a high-level view of what we're looking at as part of the preliminary analysis. So Josh, I'll hand it over back to you, or Victor.
There's one last slide. You were very patient as we went through all of that. And I'll put this summary back up later. But what you just saw by the numbers is 2.3 acres of preserved wetlands, 12 acres of expanded Creekview Park space, 60 acres plus in total open space out of the 115 acres we start with. 4.5 miles of new trails, plus designed more like a web and less like a tree, which will help with traffic. That's the greater connectivity. 967 total dwelling units of all the different types I described, and less traffic than what would be generated by the existing zoning. So I know you can tell what I think. I think it's a great deal for your community, but we need to know more about what you think about it and how we can refine this. If you're excited about it, there are some things you can do to help. First, remember that people get the community that they should have and that they deserve. Not from Santa Claus or from the Easter Bunny or sitting back and waiting for developers to just magically provide it. They get it by coming to meetings like the one you've come to and by getting informed. And so we put together a new website. It's easy to remember, villageofgoodhope.com.